Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. First, let me inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you and transform the way you learn. You can go to our website kc.bharatafirst.com for more details. Ensure that you look at the FAQs. Most of your questions will be answered there. Register now and avail the limited period early bird discounts. Orientation on June 30th and live classes start July 1st. So register now at kc.bharatafirst.com. Now, since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. You can subscribe to our newsletter as well to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. In case you have trouble with UPI IDs, you may use our payment link in the description below and follow the steps. All this information along with some must-see recommendations are in the description of the video. Please go through it. And now on to the discussion. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval on Thursday called on member nations of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to evolve an action plan to combat Pakistan-based terrorist outfits like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Doval also emphasized adoption of international standards, including a potential MOU with the Financial Action Task Force to counter financing of terrorist activity in the region. The NSA's stern words came as his Pakistani counterpart, Moeed Yusuf, was present in the audience. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze India's call for an action plan on Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed at the SCO. Joining me on the program today are Major General Shashi Asthana, retired defense and strategic expert; Dilip Sinha, former ambassador; and Professor Swaran Singh, Chair, Center for International Politics Organization and Disarmament, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. General, let me begin the program with you first. Let's first understand and analyze, the key takeaways really as far as the SEO is concerned, especially with regards to the NSA and everything that was said there.
Firstly, NSA has rightly pointed out and flagged the issue of the support to terrorism by Pakistan. And he has also named the organizations which are in the forefront of supporting the terrorism or doing terror actions all over. Now, this call and the call for action is certainly desired, and it's incumbent on India to raise it in every forum. However, if you see the expectations from SCO, we shouldn't have too much of expectations from SCO. And why I say so is, you see the composition. It's China, Russia, CAR countries, and Pakistan included. Similarly, when you see the observers, Iran, Afghanistan exist there. So therefore, as of today, SCO's main concern is the security situation arriving out of Afghanistan and not this part of it. The second issue is, while we all keep saying and always the SCO comes out with this idea that we should be taking actions against the terrorism, fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism and separatism. But if you go in the history of SCO, on 15th June 2001, Hu Jintao spoke of legal framework for three evils, for combating three evils. And these three evils were exactly the same which we are talking about today. And you normally find that whenever you have a meeting wherein no joint statement is given out, you will find that whenever the countries give their statement, obviously they will highlight something which interests them. And therefore, even in our media reports, you will find that naming these two terror groups and demanding action is very well covered and very well highlighted. Whereas the major concerns we are also there, which have also been discussed, which is the security situation in Afghanistan, which concerns most of these members. That is all the SCO members, all the CAR countries, as well as United Nations, which happens to be also in the meeting. So therefore, and also there are certain other challenges which are coming up, like COVID, like cyber security and things like that. So they have also been discussed. But notwithstanding that, India's call is very well justified for Pakistan, and naming, shaming Pakistan in every sphere. We certainly don't support terrorism in any form and manifestation anywhere in the world. And therefore, I think the stand taken by the NSA is absolutely apt and absolutely desired. Frank.
So coming to you now, Ambassador. Let's take the points forward that the general has just made, and try and dwell on that and talk and talk about that as well. So as far as the NSA is concerned, the general also made a very important point with regards to the SCO and how we should not have too many expectations. So what kind of leverage do we get by raising such issues at organizations like the SCO from a diplomatic point of view?
Well, the SCO, as the general mentioned, is one should not have very high expectations of it. It is an international organization like so many others, which is very high in ambition and very modest in its achievements. But the SCO has one other characteristic, and that is that it's not composed of like-minded countries. So on terrorism, for example, the issue that we raised there, our major concern on terrorism emanates from Pakistan. But Pakistan is a member of the SCO. So what kind of action can we expect from the SCO on this? Now, the SCO has essentially two permanent organs. One is the Secretariat in Beijing, and the other is the RATS, or the Regional Anti-Terror Mechanism, which is based in Tashkent. Now, so far, it has not taken any significant initiative on terrorism. And the reason for that is understandable, because the epicenter of terrorism, which is Pakistan, is a member of the organization. So what can we expect from this? We have made the point since we are members, since we became members, but the fact remains that in this organization, there are very few commonalities. Now, if you look at the last declaration, the summit declaration, the Moscow declaration in November 2020, at 2 points, the remaining 7 members are mentioned as concurring with the declaration, and India is the odd man out. India's reference is not there. One was on this key issue of supporting China's BRI, which is very important. The other 7 countries were mentioned. India was not mentioned in that because we don't support the BRI. And the other was on a matter of information security. There again, the remaining 7 countries were mentioned. India was not mentioned because there's a particular initiative that we did not concur with. So we are the odd man out in this organization, but we are members of it. So I suppose once we are there, we have to make our point and assert our point over there. But I don't think we should expect any kind of action by the SCO for the simple reason that Pakistan is a member there, and we cannot expect Pakistan to concur with any action to be taken by the SCO on terrorism. In fact, Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed that were mentioned are both based in Pakistan. And that's not what India says, it's also what the UN documents state. So whether we mention Pakistan or not, the fact is that when you mention these two organizations, we are referring to a fellow member in a small organization like 8-member SCO. 1 member stands out. But that member clearly is more on board with the other members of the SCO than India is, as is evident from the singling out of India on those 2 issues in the Moscow Declaration.
Absolutely. Reminds me of SARC, Professor, and how that, what turns that took, but clearly SCO will not take that turn. But as time goes on, do you believe that India will slowly start losing interest in an organization in a multilateral like the SCO?
Thank you, Frank. I don't think SCO is comparable to SARC because SCO has had its own share of success, a great deal of success, initially at least, and they have very clearly defined their objective to be largely terrorism and transnational crime. Of course, driven by China, they usually call it international terrorism, extremism, and radicalism. that's a language that they use, and they have added now religious radicalism and information security and cyber security and even food security in middle of pandemic. So there is a certain imprint of China, and of course Russia would have a certain advantage. But India's interest disappearing in that, I don't see that happening, because it's much larger now. There are several observer countries, special invitees. So I would like to put this meeting in Dushanbe in a context. You have to see that in last few days only, Prime Minister has had a direct conversation with 14 party leaders from Jammu and Kashmir province, Union Territory. This is also the time when, for the first time, India has started a direct dialogue in Qatar with Taliban. And now, meeting of NSAs in that backdrop in Dushanbe in SCO format. Also, the fact that NSA of India and NSA of Pakistan, Moeed Yusuf, have had perhaps a back channel diplomacy going on between them. Reports have said that they have been meeting without publicizing them. In fact, Indian National Security Advisor has perhaps even met the chief of ISI, Lieutenant General Hamid, and he's in touch with the General Kamar Bajwa also. So it's a very different kind of combination of various things that India has been sort of doing, not bringing too much limelight to some of these. And in that context, I think this meeting, and I would even, hazard a guess that maybe without publicizing, the two NSAs may have had a meeting, on the sidelines in Dushanbe as well. So I think that the unsaid part, the imperceptible part, is where I think SCO becomes a very interesting format, which has a clear focus on terrorism after they had resolved the boundary issues and they formalized themselves as from Shanghai 5 to Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They had also for some time focused on energy security, but that has kind of not become as robust as focus on terrorism has become. So even this time, they have mentioned terrorism being something they all jointly want to fight together. You also need to remember that last time, Doval had walked out of this NSA's meeting because there was a map shown by a Pakistani presentation. And it is reverse in that context. This time, Indian National Security Advisor is naming two terrorist outfits based in Pakistan. And of course, NSA from Pakistan obviously has not walked out on this. So I think these unsaid, imperceptible parts is what makes Shanghai Cooperation Organization platform interesting, where I think bilaterally India and Pakistan may be able to do certain things before it is formalized and brought into public view. So I assume it remains relevant and it remains active. Incidentally, China was absent, so that may also have given a certain advantage India in that sense of India being an influential nation sitting there. So these are much of the smaller, invisible parts which perhaps make India very well engaged and interested in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And Shanghai Cooperation Organization in general being a fairly active and robust organization, even if India and Pakistan are not the movers and shakers in that organization. So I would not compare SCO to SARC. And I think there is enormous relevance given the fact that India is taking some of these very, very innovative ways of addressing issues of terrorism, and consultation on Afghanistan is another interesting area. India is directly talking to Taliban. In that sense, what took place between two NSAs to explain India's new overture of directly talking to Taliban could also be something interesting as to whether they exchange anything on this. So it's an important platform. I think India is using it to the hilt.
Right. General, let me come back to you now. The NSA also spoke about terror funding and terror financing. Now, how big an issue is that? And do you see the SCO successfully addressing that particular aspect as well?
This issue certainly is important because terror financing meeting was also going on simultaneously. And if we flag this issue, certainly it may have some kind of impact in the FATF meeting as well. We all know that Pakistan does terror funding and a fair amount of points had been given to them. They claim to have worked on almost most of the points except few. But notwithstanding that, they are yet to get out from the grey list so far. But notwithstanding that, thinking that SCO will get linked to FATF, some of the media reports were saying that perhaps some FATF will do that. That I don't think is going to happen because SCO is a regional organization. FATF also has its regional wings. So I don't think FATF is going to modify its structure uh, to suit the SCO's requirement, because there are other regional organizations also. Because tomorrow NATO will also say that we should also be perhaps attached to SCO or FATF or otherwise. So that's one part of it. The second thing which I want to highlight is that this SCO meeting, I totally agree with the professor as well as the others, as well as Mr. Sinha, that we need to be part of it. In today's world, diplomacy and information warfare, these are elements of soft power which add on to the comprehensive national power. And we cannot be lying low on it. You cannot influence a particular group if you are out of it. So to influence a group, you actually have to be inside the group. So therefore, we need to be in SU and we need to be doing this. The third point I want to highlight is where I think everybody's interests are involved, and that is Afghanistan. All the members, if you see whether it is Russia or it is China or it is CAR countries or it is Afghanistan itself, which is an observer, and it is United Nations, because we are also looking at, I think the point came up that perhaps UN can have a bigger role in Afghanistan. Now, everybody is connected to the security situation emerging out with Taliban gaining grounds every day. And therefore, I think an Indian interest is also very important there. At the same time, we are slightly handicapped because we do not have the direct borders there, as well as we are also not the immediate neighbors so long we don't get back the POK and Gilgit-Baltistan and all these areas. So therefore, we need to utilize every possible opportunity, and SEO is one possible opportunity, because if we are not the members, rest of the members of the SEO are the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan. And so therefore, in that context, I think whatever is collectively decided for the interest of everybody is important. Similarly, when China has been talking about the three evils, now they were actually referring to ETIM at that point of time, and they continue to refer to ETIM even now, because their concern is Xinjiang and terrorism actually moving towards Xinjiang. But notwithstanding that, the same concerns is for everybody else, whether it is CAR countries, whether it is Pakistan, because Pakistan also perhaps feels that it should strengthen Durand line because of TTP being quite active in the new regime, if it works in the manner in which it is working. So I think it's a common interest, and therefore a common agenda and a common outline plan may help everybody else, including India. Frank.
Absolutely. No, Ambassador, taking this particular point forward, how do we ensure a grouping like the SCO, works in our favor? How do we influence it positively? What needs to be done on in that regards?
No, I have my skepticism about whether we can influence the SCO or not. The SCO, as you know, was initiated by China, and China is the prime mover of this organization. I was trying to look at the website of this organization, and the website has half the page is full of one ad, and that is China Daily on it, and then the photographs come in. I was looking for the charter of the SCO, and the charter was not available either on the website of the SCO from Beijing or of the website of RATS from Tashkent. So this organization is dominated by China, and China is trying to move it the way it wants to move it. The West suspects this organization. In fact, there are reports, that unconfirmed reports, that the US had tried to become a member of the SCO in 2005 and it was rejected. Now, one doesn't know if that is true. But the fact remains that, again, if you look at the Moscow Declaration, there is one reference very specifically to not directly to the US, but it criticizes the US because it expresses concern over the unilateral withdrawal from the INF, the Intermediate Nuclear Missiles Treaty. That was a direct reference to Donald Trump's withdrawal from the INF. Now, the wisdom of the action apart, the fact is that the West looks at this SCO as a manifestation of China's effort to build its own international order. Now, if we join the international order the way China wants it, by all means, we can become part of it. But that is the larger question that we have to make up our mind on. Do we want to, at this time when there is a Cold War brewing and picking up, and China is trying to establish its own institutions, of which the SCO is the nascent core. Do we want to be part of that? We have just on the day of the meeting of the NSA, we have had a dialogue, not a spat with China on the border issue. China accused India of having started the crisis a year ago, and India then said China was the organization that did it. On the issue of terrorism, again with Pakistan, we have had spats on this issue. So this is an organization where I don't know how much we can have, what influence we have. And as far as our staying out of it is concerned, let's remember that there are two very central countries to Central Asia. One is Mongolia, one is Turkmenistan, and neither of them is a member of the SCO. Mongolia because it doesn't want to annoy Japan, and Turkmenistan for whatever reasons Turkmenistan has of remaining out. So one doesn't necessarily have to join every organization simply because it is there, but certainly if it suits our purposes, and then we have to take very close look at the objectives of the organization and how effective we are. And this can only be judged by people who actually participate in these meetings to see how in they are in the inner circles of the decision-making process. If they are, then by all means, if we are able to influence the decisions. But if we are not, then I don't think we should have any hesitation in saying we quit. It's all a matter of national interest. There are any number of organizations where India and Pakistan are members. If you're looking for a place to meet a Pakistani NSA, there are any number of places where we can meet them. In the SCO, one of the expectations that India had was that Pakistan would give India transit. Now, Pakistan has denied India transit in the SAFTA, and it has denied India transit in the SCO. So if we can get on with this expectation, and if we make so much success in this, perhaps it would be useful. But so far, I don't see how the SCO has benefited us, apart from giving us a forum where we can speak.
You know, I was going to ask you a follow-up question on should we be a part of SCO or not, but I think I have my answer. So I'm going to let that be and move on to the professor. Professor, should we then focus our energies on like-minded countries? We saw what happened with Joe Biden's trip to Europe, despite everything that has happened in the previous regime's tenure, that is Donald Trump's tenure. There seems to be some rapprochement between Europe and the United States as well. So the Atlantic seems to be going in the right direction right now. So should we be focusing more on like-minded countries and democracies at this point in time, especially when the world is looking to take on China with regards to the origins of the virus, trade, and so many other issues? Or should we be a part of everything, and should we put our eggs in all baskets?
I think if India was a weak, small, and marginalized nation, perhaps it will be a wise policy in that case to look at like-minded groupings and have cozy relationship there. India is possibly world's largest nation in terms of population, sixth or fifth largest economy, huge armed forces, very powerful middle class. And therefore, just like we have embassies in more than 128 countries and regions, we have the capacity to engage with as many multilateral organizations as there are. In fact, despite India having had a very painful partition, in those days, India was extremely engaged in international affairs. Both in terms of your history, in terms of your leverages, India has always been there. So I don't see it as a matter of limitation, either in terms of desire or feasibility that India would not be able to join as many multilateral organizations as there are. Now, why should India continue to engage in Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Let us look at it that this is clearly looked upon by the Western nations led by United States as alternative other voice, or an organization which is kind of led, guided by China along with Russia. Now, if potentially a large nation like India was to step out of it, A, it will be advantage Pakistan. B, it will be a pathway to gradually isolating China. And in that situation, China would have possibly, in worst case scenario, if it is pushed to isolation, two choices. One, either to get into a Detan kind of equation that Soviet Union and United States had after the Cuban Missile Crisis, especially at end of 60s, or get into confrontation. Neither is good for India because India is next door with a disputed largest boundary on the planet between any two nations. So to keep the cushion and keep engagement so that you are familiar with what is going on in Chinese power elite is a good sense directly between India and China to keep a tab and sort of bring name and shame on Pakistan in multilateral forums is also useful with Pakistan. Strengthen India's equations with Russia, which is a traditional partner of India. Again, a very significant forum like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So I think it is extremely significant, and India would continue to be engaged with Shanghai Cooperation Organization, despite the fact that China would have a certain advantage of both having the secretariat, having started the organization, having all kinds of other leverages that it has. So India is not looking for an equation of bro-beating Beijing. India is looking at what it can draw from there. And I think in that sense, India is incrementally drawing upon Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, as I said, has a clear central focus on addressing terrorism. You could phrase it differently because there is a Chinese footprint on it. But nevertheless, if you have Pakistan sitting in an organization which exclusively focuses on terrorism and transnational crime, I think it stands clearly advantage India both in relationship with Pakistan and in issues of terrorism in general. India is also constant for about 3 decades arguing at United Nations for CCIT, Comprehensive Counterterrorism Agreement. And if a multilateral organization like Shanghai Cooperation Organization with 2 veto-wielding members is able to come to consensus that that kind of issue needs to be really built up and we need to have a consensus on that definition, it is again advantage at global level argument that India is making in that sense. So I find it extremely useful that India should and India will continue to be engaged with Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Absolutely. All right. Time to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, General.
I think we should continue with the SEO and keep making our noise and our voice be heard in that organization. And secondly, even in past, wherever we disagreed, we have disagreed, whether it was a case of BRI or it is any other case. So anything which is not in our interest, India has the sufficient clout to disagree and not sign any document which Shanghai Cooperation Organization may claim to be their consensus. So I think we should continue being there as a strong nation. Frank.
Right. Ambassador.
I think we have this organization called SICA, which is the Conference on Interaction and CBMs in Asia, which was initiated by Kazakhstan. Russia is a member of that. So if we want to promote our relations with Central Asia and with Russia, that's a very good international forum to be part of, which would not have the non-like-minded countries. We have kept out of RCEP because of the fears that we had of China's domination. So I see no reason why we should walk into an organization and stay in an organization where China continues to dominate and dictate terms. I think we have enough forums for regional cooperation. We can utilize and build on those rather than build an organization that is named after a town in China. I don't know of any other international organization of this kind which is named after a city in one of the member states. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's a very telling final point that you've made. Professor, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Thank you. I think China is a reality. Even on CICA, on which Nazarbayev was allowed to take all the credit, the brain behind that initiative was again Chinese. So China is a reality which cannot be overlooked. And I think in that sense, there will be so many organizations, including gradually, I think potentially United Nations itself, because China, as you notice in last 10 to 15 years, is gradually trying to take over virtually all international organizations one after another. And if India was to make choices of quitting organizations where China has influence, I think that will be very, very dangerous choice to make for Indian foreign policy.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave to that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, what's coming out of this discussion is that India did the right thing by naming Pakistani terror organizations at the SCO and calling for an action plan. However, we should not expect too much from the organization. It hasn't delivered in the past, and since China holds the reins, it is China-centric and difficult for us to pass or push through anything. Also, since Pakistan is a member of the SCO, action can't be expected. But we have to continue to raise the issue of terror emanating out of Pakistan at all forums to keep the pressure up. Maybe it's time that we also consider engaging more actively in other organizations where our sphere of influence is higher. Well, before I go, let me inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you and transform the way you learn. You can go to our website kc.bharatafirst.com for more details. Ensure that you look at the FAQs. Most of your questions will be answered there. Register now and avail the limited period early bird discounts. Orientation on June 30th and live classes start July 1st. So register today at kc.bharatafirst.com. Well, thank you once again for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon and then all notifications. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. In case you have trouble with the UPI IDs, you may use our payment link in the description below and follow the steps. All the information is in the description of this video along with some must-see recommendations. So please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.